Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got a great show for you here. We're going to start with the topic of, will the coronavirus stop Donald Trump in 2020? Will the outcome of this coronavirus have an effect on the election? And we're going to talk about that in detail in just a moment. And then we're moving into some protest issues. California has now stopped any type of protesting on state property. And we'll talk about the specifics of that. And then Attorney General Barr warns that states may be going too far in their shutdown rules and regulations of American citizens, literally saying Americans are on house arrest. And we'll talk about that in detail. But we start with President Trump's re-election in 2020 and whether or not he's going to be able to accomplish it, and how the impact of coronavirus may actually, and the economy kind of tied together now, impact that. Coronavirus changes Trump re-election calculus in key states, and this is from a Wall Street Journal article. Rising jobless deaths and political tensions are putting new pressure on President Trump in key battleground states. Hang on one second here. Let me move this. There we go. Key battleground states, creating uncertainty about his re-election prospects, even as he projects an improved outlook on the coronavirus pandemic. So is this what Nancy Pelosi has been praying for? You know, she said famously that she prays for Donald Trump all the time. Probably, yeah, I hope you fall on a sword today. But is she praying that the economy collapses, that people get sick and die? I'm not necessarily saying that, but they definitely want the news to be bad and bleak going into November. Keep in mind, we're going to play this video in just a second, that Bill Maher showed you their hand back in 2018 when he was talking about what it might take to actually get Donald Trump unelected or defeated in 2020. Check this out from Bill Maher, and you'll see exactly how the Democrats, the progressives, take this. What I say about progressives is always take their word at it. Just listen to what they have to say. With Trump derangement syndrome, they are telling you exactly what is on their mind. And I think that this, even though this was back in 2018, I think it is very relevant today. And Bill Maher has actually kind of doubled down on this on several occasions. But this was one of the times in 2018 when he told you exactly what he, and you can believe this, the progressives want. Check it out.
This economy is going pretty well. We have to, what? Why is that funny?
It is going well for now.
For now, right. That's my, thank you. That's my question. Is like, I feel like the bottom has to fall out at some point. And by the way, I'm hoping for it, because I think one way you get rid of Trump is a crashing economy. Yeah. So please bring on the recession. Yeah. Sorry if that hurts people, but it's either.
Please bring on the recession. And we're definitely heading not only for a recession would be a godsend almost, in a sense. We're actually, make no mistake about it, we're heading for an outright depression based on the economic numbers as they are right now. Can President Trump turn this around? No doubt he can. I don't think there's any question Joe Biden couldn't turn it around. And a lot of this is going to be up to the American people. You know, the economy, and you rarely hear people talk about it in this regard, that they talk about like presidents or like this is Obama's economy, or they'll say, oh, it's Trump's economy, and vice versa. And there's some truth to the idea that a president, by just policy alone, cannot make the economy roar like President Trump did. Now, don't misunderstand me. A lot of the policies that President Trump has put forward are definitely helping Americans and American business. There's no question about that. But the attitude of Americans towards the economy is the key. Americans, if they believe that things are going well, they tend to go well. And if they don't believe it, they tend to go the other way. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. So one of the things, and please understand, I am not saying that President Trump isn't responsible for the economy by direct policy implementation that he has done. But I would say that the greatest thing that President Trump has done for the U.S. economy is make us Americans believe in it again. That is the thing that brought about the miracle of the Trump economy more than any particular policy, was a confidence that we were great again, that we were moving in the right direction, that America was and hopefully is exceptional. That belief is extremely powerful. And Donald Trump understands this probably better than about anybody out there. So the economy, yes, there are factors in the economy that are draining it down, job loss, all these kind of things. And yes, opening up the states, and we're going to talk more about that in just a moment, is going to help. But ultimately, the way the economy ends up going is certainly the speed in which it does. A large portion of that is going to be determined by us, the American people, and our belief in what the president is doing. And so I actually think that aspect of it is going to help President Trump, and we'll expand on that as this story unfolds. But keep in mind, the Democrats, the progressives, I'm not talking about all Democrats, I'm talking about the elected leaders of the Democratic Party. They are actually wanting the economy to be in the tank come November, because they do believe that is the one thing, and they're probably right about that, that is the one thing where President Trump could be vulnerable, and we'll expand on that as we go forward. While Mr. Trump's national poll numbers hold steady and his base supporters remain loyal, the fast-moving virus, talking about the coronavirus, could complicate his path in some of the states that delivered him to the White House in 2016, some fellow Republicans say. Now, they're probably all anonymous, right? But that's true. There's no question about it. This pandemic, this virus, how we're responding to it, what's happening in the economy, how we're going to be looking a few months from now, all of that is going to play a role. Anyone who doesn't think so is not being realistic. The pandemic has wiped out the economic strength Mr. Trump planned to run on, giving an opening to presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. This is not about Joe Biden. This election in 2020, I don't believe is going to be about Joe Biden. If it is, then Joe Biden can't win, because it's not about that. It is an election about Donald Trump. And yes, how people feel about the economy is a big deal. But think about this. If people put the economy as number one on their list of priorities, do you really think that Joe Biden is going to fare well under those circumstances? It really ends up depending on who they blame and all that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But Trump wins if it's about Biden. If it is about Biden specifically, I believe Donald Trump will win, period. And as I say, I'll expand on that. As I've been talking about this, and my son brought this up to me a few months ago, and he's absolutely right. He asked me, he said, "Dad, have you ever met anyone who was passionate about Joe Biden?" And I had to think about it, and I got to say, I haven't. And to this day, even though Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee, I don't see people passionate about Joe at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. They're scared about Joe. They're just anti-Trump. Whenever you try this out, see if I'm right. I can just tell you from my own personal experience, when I challenge some of my Facebook friends, I'm talking about some of my personal friends who are liberal, about Joe Biden or anything to do really with the Democratic Party in general, they never come back with a defense of Joe Biden. They always come back with an anti-Trump statement. So this election for them is not about Joe Biden. It never has been. If it was about Joe Biden, he wouldn't be the nominee, would he? It's about defeating Donald Trump, and they didn't think Bernie Sanders could do it, and they're hoping and praying that Biden can. And any port in a storm, Joe Biden was a lousy candidate before. He was a lousy candidate during this election, and he'll be a lousy candidate moving forward. The only thing is they were drowning in a sea of anti-Trump, and Joe Biden's bloated body, that's why I call him Bloated Joe, floated by after South Carolina, and they just grabbed onto it. It's this election, and I'll repeat it probably multiple times today and right on through November. It is not about Joe Biden. And to what extent it is detrimental to Joe Biden. Said Republican strategist Dennis Denari of Michigan, he said this, it's definitely was always going to be a headwind coming into this state, talking about the Michigan. Because keep in mind, this really isn't a national election. The presidential election is the only one that we vote on nationally. But really, when you look at our system electoral, it is a state-by-state election. And this will be no different whatsoever. But he says here that it definitely was always going to be a headwind coming into this state. He's talking about Michigan. He, talking about Trump, needed to be in a position where he kept what he won last time and built on it. But the problem is now the virus has hit and job losses are pretty severe. Now, keep in mind, see, this is something I have to remind you, my listeners, about this. People are always posting Trump 2020, and I get that. I'm with you 100%. Believe that. But we can't take anything for granted. We have to look at the data and the numbers. And I'm not talking about poll numbers per se, although we will discuss some of it in a minute. But the reality is Trump won many of these states by a fraction of the vote. In 2016 in Michigan, he won by 10,000 votes. That's nothing. Think about that. That is nothing. That type of voting could simply be swung by whether it rains or snows on that particular day. So it is critical that people don't take this election for granted if you're for Donald Trump. But here's a question, because this one, he asked this question that Donald Trump has to keep what he won last time and build upon it. So the question is, has he? I think Donald Trump has clearly held on to his base throughout this ordeal, and I don't think that is going to change. I think Donald Trump's base level of support, in other words, you MAGA hat wearing sons of gun, dregs of society, basket of deplorables, I don't see any wavering on your determination to reelect Donald Trump. In fact, I see even more passion about it. So I'm not worried about that. But it says, has he built on what he did last time? Well, I don't think we're ultimately going to know that until come November. I suspect that he has. There's been various polling showing that he has. I mean, his approval rating has always been artificially pushed lower by the mainstream media on a continuous basis. But I think when you look at the fact that President Trump's approval rating, now it's ebbed and flowed a little in the last couple of weeks, but even in the middle of this pandemic, he got his highest numbers ever, 49%, shows that he has built upon that. So, but ultimately, we're not going to know that until November. We can take all the polls we want, but until people actually cast their ballots, however they end up doing it, and you know how I feel about that mail-in voting, but we're not going to know if he's built upon it until it actually happens. Among 6 states seen as 2020 battlegrounds, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina, there have been some warning signs as well as evidence of support for Mr. Trump. The political equation could change further in those states, and that is for sure. There are some things we're just not going to know until a few months from now, and maybe even, like I say, right up to November. As governors said, it could change as governors move to lift coronavirus restrictions soon, as Mr. Trump has urged and others choose to wait. I can tell you Florida is poised to reopen. I saw some Governor DeSantis interviewed several times in the last few days. I've also been privy to some conference calls among Republican leaders, which guess what? I'm actually one of them in the state of Florida. And I can tell you that Governor DeSantis is determined to try to reopen Florida as soon as it's reasonably and safely possible. And I believe and this is just a speculation on my part, if I had to venture a guess, I do believe he is going to lift some elements of the stay-at-home order by May 1st, which is kind of the target date. But just to show you how crazy things are, our local mayor here And when I say local, I mean the city of Gainesville, where we broadcast from, a guy named Lauren Poe, has actually come out with a statement in the last couple of days that Gainesville, now I don't think he has the authority to actually do this, but he said Gainesville is going to the stay-at-home order and social distancing is going to be in place until we have a vaccine. Now, that could be forever. Well, one thing, we may never, there's no guarantee we're going to get a vaccine. Most people think we will get some variation of one similar to the flu vaccine, which is, not 100%. But it's still going to take at minimum a year, more like probably 18 to 24 months to really have that implemented. So the mayor here locally is literally saying that you can't gather, and he made this specific comment in his statement, that they're not going to allow gatherings of more than 10 people. Well, that essentially shuts down the University of Florida, right here in the heart of Gainesville, 60,000 students. I mean, you imagine if you can't have, because if you got one teacher, then that means you can only have, 9 students, because you can't have more than 10. You can't operate a university based on that. So it would just totally shut down the economy of Gainesville and basically the whole surrounding area. But these are the progressives. The city commission that I deal with sometimes here in Gainesville, they are ultimately virtue signalers. He knows that he doesn't have, people are wondering, how can he do this? He probably can't. But I'll tell you, my local listeners, and I'm sure this is happening in many parts of the country, what they're doing at the local city commission here in Gainesville is they're virtue signaling. They're trying to show that they are, the ones that actually believe in science and are taking to heart the best interests of people around the world. They're citizens of the world. Michigan has been hit hard with more than 31,000 coronavirus cases, and a high-profile spat continues between Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmire and Mr. Trump. Well, now she is on the short list, supposedly, for Biden's VP. And, of course, Michigan, as I said, President Trump only won that by 10,000 votes. So having the governor of Michigan on the ticket could swing that state. If you don't think so, you're just not really being realistic. Now, I do think that Governor Whitmer has hurt herself with her own citizens by being so draconian and so arbitrary in some of the things. And we're not going to get into the specifics. You know what I'm talking about, especially if you're from Michigan. But it's been well publicized how idiotic some of the rules that they have there. And when you look at it, and this applies to many states, including my great state of Florida here, that the virus itself, some states aren't even really experiencing it, basically. But other states are, and Michigan certainly is at one of the top 4 or 5 in the country at coronavirus infections. But the reality is the vast majority of those are centered around Detroit. And I'm not knocking Detroit. The vast majority of infections are centered around densely populated areas. That's just a fact. But so are you going to keep the entire state of Michigan shut down based on what's coming out of Detroit? Or are you going to be realistic and focus on where the hot spots are and the rest can gradually open back up? She doesn't seem to be that way. These progressive Dems, I find it hard to believe, and I'll say this and I'll move along. I find it hard to believe that they all are on the same page in reality. Now, are they on the same page of talking points? No question about it. They are. The Democrats do that much better than the Republicans. But I do believe that there are individuals who think differently. They're not going to voice that, but because they don't want Donald Trump to get reelected. I don't know how else to put it. Their Trump derangement syndrome is so much, just like Bill Maher said, they're willing to let their own people suffer. In Michigan, you Michiganders face this. Your governor, in my humble opinion, opinionated fact nonetheless, is willing to let you suffer economically if it delivers the White House to the Democrats. And she hopes to be in, the Naval Observatory where the VP lives. In Wisconsin, some Republicans were alarmed last week when a Democrat won a closely watched state Supreme Court race over a Republican incumbent backed by the president. I keep hearing this about Wisconsin, and it's true. The Democrats won statewide races and everything overwhelmingly over Republicans. But the reality is Republicans didn't vote. Keep in mind, that was a presidential preference primary, and let's face it, the only ones that really had an incentive to vote were the Democrats. Now, I know Republicans should come out in vast numbers and vote, but given the reality of the situation at the time that the Wisconsin primary was held, I don't think it's I think to put much stock in what happened in that vote either way is probably not smart. So I hope they're actually thinking that, hey, they don't have much work to do in Wisconsin, they, the progressive Democrats, because look what they did in that presidential preference primary. I hope that's their attitude. I suspect it won't be. They're going to come out working hard. Democrats are going to work hard to defeat Donald Trump. If you don't think they are, you're just kidding yourself. As I say again, this is not about Joe Biden. This is about President Donald Trump, Trump derangement syndrome, and how much it will motivate them to turn out the vote to defeat Donald Trump. It's really what it's all about. This election is all about President Trump. It just is. And I don't see anything really changing that. It could change as far as how people who are on the fence vote, but ultimately this election is going to come down to how people feel about President Trump. I don't see it any other way. Florida's tourism industry has been battered, and the pandemic could have lasting repercussions in what is seen as a must-win state for Mr. Trump. I absolutely agree. If there's one state, now there's a lot of states that he needs to win, obviously, but Florida is a must. There is no question about that. Florida is a must-win state, and I believe that if the election were held today, Donald Trump would win Florida probably better than he won before. But it's not today, and a lot can happen between now and November. Economically, Florida obviously depends on tourism in a huge way. So I think states like Florida are going to be impacted more by the aftermath of the coronavirus than a lot of other states because of tourism. Are people going to be willing and even able to travel to Florida, whether it's domestic travel like within the United States or certainly overseas? I'll give you a quick example. Orlando is the #1 tourist destination really in the world before this happened. It was, and it's primarily because of Disney and, Universal Studios and all that. A lot of things built up around it. How does Disney come back from this? And I'm a big fan of Disney in general. I grew up going to Disney World, all that kind of stuff. Been to Disneyland when I was a little kid before Disney World even happened. So I grew up with Walt Disney. I'm all for Disney. And do I agree with everything? No, but you know what I'm saying. But think about it. How does something like Disney come back from this? In the short term, I don't see how they do. In the long term, yeah, they could come back. But just take, for instance, say Space Mountain. If you've ever been to like Disney World, the line for some of these rides is incredible, and they like cattle going in there. Can you imagine what the line for Space Mountain or any other major attraction would be if everybody has to distance 6 feet, social distance? The line would literally be to Orlando. It would be impossible. It is going to be impossible, in my opinion, to actually practice social distancing at a place like Disney. It's just not possible. Now, the beaches. Our governor has come under some flack, not too much from Floridians, by the way, but from others, CNN and everything else, for opening the beaches. It was exaggerated how much he opened them. Basically, they opened selective beaches for recreation as far as walking, and told you not to hang out. But the beaches could be our saving grace. It always has brought tourism. And if they're open to anywhere close to full capacity as far as what you can do there, that could be. Now, the biggest thing that Donald Trump has going for him beyond just people, he's a resident now of Florida. We really appreciate that. Is keep in mind, I say basically the Cuban vote. And it's not all about Cuba, but it's a big deal. And the Hispanic vote in Florida in general, especially people coming from places like Cuba, Venezuela, and whatnot, which is a growing big deal in Florida. Bernie Sanders destroyed any shot he had at winning the nomination when he made those statements praising Castro. Now, I know that that Biden is not the same as Bernie Sanders, but there is an aftermath effect of that. And to what extent, and when I say exploit, I don't mean it quite as it sounds, but what extent the Trump campaign can exploit the distrust between the Hispanics that are tied to regimes like in Venezuela and Castro, and tag the Democratic Party with that. And I believe that is a very strong possibility that could keep Florida red for sure. Unemployment has soared in some electoral battlegrounds with 21%. These are interesting numbers. Some of them don't surprise me, and a couple of them did. Unemployment has soared in some electoral college battlegrounds with 21% of workers in Michigan and nearly 20% in Pennsylvania applying for unemployment in the past 4 weeks. That number is only going to go up for a while. Now, it may come back down as these states reopen and the economy picks up, but before it's going to take a while. Even if they were to lift the stay-at-home order this afternoon, it is going to take a while, maybe even several years, let alone a few weeks, for people to just feel comfortable getting back out in crowds and, going to football games and going to restaurants and movie theaters and anything like that, maybe even to church. It's going to take people a little while to do that. So it's not like it's just going to be turn the light switch on, the economy just goes boom. It's going to do like this. I think so. And it says here in Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, the number was around 10%. What really surprised me is that Florida unemployment rate, according to this survey, is at 6%. That's pretty amazing when you consider what has happened in Florida and how our tourists. So that makes me a bit optimistic. But it's going to come down to, when it comes to the economy, is who do you blame? Who do you blame for the downturn in the economy? And who can you trust to turn it around? So if people, by and large, blame the president, that's going to be a major blow to his chances for re-election. I don't sense that right now. I'm not saying they won't become November. I don't think anyone who tells you that they know for sure that people won't blame Donald Trump for the economic downturn are just being foolish, because we just don't know. As I said, we don't know what we don't know. So we don't know how quick the economy is going to come back. Right now, this minute, I don't sense that the majority of the American people actually blame Donald Trump. So that's good. And if you were to ask people who could turn this thing around the quickest, if you were to do a poll right now saying of the choices of Donald Trump or Joe Biden, who could turn the economy around the quickest? Well, I don't see any way that a majority of people would pick Joe Biden. So to what extent they blame Trump, or they believe that Trump is the only chance or the best chance to turn it around, is going to be very significant how that weighs out come November. And an April Wall Street Journal NBC national poll showed Mr. Trump's approval rating at 46%. So it's dropped a little bit, but they say unchanged from his approval in March. Depends on which poll you're looking at, I guess. His rating on handling the coronavirus tracks closely with his job approval at 44%, similar to 45% in March. Now, some people may be surprised that his numbers have held steady, but I give the American people a lot more credit than the mainstream media does. The American people, and there are some polling that shows this, they know where the virus came from. It came from China. Now, are they blaming Chinese people? I don't think so. Are they blaming communist China? Those that actually are woke know the truth. But the American people know where the Chinese virus came from. They know where the kung fu fighting flu came from. That is why the media has just hammered this idea that you call it the Wuhan virus or the China virus, because they want people to be fooled by where it came from or unsure, so they can blame Trump. But right now, I believe the American people know where it came from, and I don't think that's going to change. In a direct matchup, Mr. Biden leads Mr. Trump 49 to 42% in the poll of 900 registered voters. Mr. Biden is also leading Mr. Trump in many swing state polls. Well, what we feel about polls. I don't totally discount them, but obviously they didn't know what the heck they were talking about in 2016. But here's something I want you to keep in mind, and I'm going to continue to pound this over and over, because if I say it, first of all, it bears repeating, and secondly, it is vitally important you understand this. Take Joe Biden out of the picture. It doesn't, what I'm about to say doesn't matter who the Democratic person is. Whoever it is starts out with a great advantage in the Electoral College. Is there anyone that can argue with me that the Democrats are going to win California? They're going to win Illinois. They're going to win Massachusetts, and they're going to win New York State. They're going to win those four. I don't care who it is. It could be the jackass himself, a donkey. They probably do better, actually. But they're going to win those four states. And there's really nothing President Trump can do about it. Now, could I be wrong? Sure. Would you bet on that? Would you actually bet any amount of money that they won't win those states that I just listed? So that gives the Democrats a big advantage right off the bat. And Donald Trump, in this case, whoever the Republican nominee is, but Donald Trump has got to overcome that. And they can, there's no doubt about it. He did with Hillary, no question about it. With traditional campaigning, including the president's signature mega rallies, shut down due to the pandemic, the Trump campaign said they have been aggressive with online phone contacts with voters. Mr. Biden's campaign has also been doing remote outreach as well. We did a story on this earlier this week. Biden can't even hold a candle to President Trump when it comes to the digital campaign. The Democrats are way behind on that. Obama was just miles ahead of Republicans both times in that digital deal, and Republicans learned from that. And I can tell you right now that the Republican Party, and especially combined with Donald Trump, which they are lockstep. They weren't in 2016. They are in 2020. I'm not talking about, the Romneys of the world. I'm talking about the party leaders. The apparatus is lockstep with the Trump organization. And Brad Pascal, who was Trump's digital guy in 2016 and now his campaign manager in 2020, is largely responsible for that. And I don't know how Biden and his group can overcome that, but they're going to try. Biden campaign spokesman T.J. Duckalo said, "This election now has become a clear choice for voters." I think that's probably true. Here's what he says the choice is. I don't agree with it. It says choice between competence and experience, which we are demonstrating every day, and a White House that is completely lacking in both. So let me just tell you, Mr. Biden and the Biden campaign, as we here at John Martin Talks, we're always trying to help. That's one thing about our show. We're always trying to help. If true, I'm going to use the Democrats thing. If true that this election is going to come down to a choice between competence and experience, Joe Biden is through. If this campaign is about competence, it's over. It's over for Biden. I can tell you that now. You can show me all the polls you want. If what Biden's spokesperson said it comes down to about competence, Biden is done. The TV ad wars are also in full bloom in key states. A Democratic super PAC, Priorities USA Action, has spent $9 million on ads. Basically, what these ads are, and I've seen a couple of them here in Florida, because we are a targeted state, obviously, and they're pretty good. They are. They basically take statements. Of course, they're out of context. They're not fair, but they're pretty effective. Maybe we'll have to. Only time will tell about that. But they basically paint the president as being, lack of response, downplaying the virus, all that stuff, which is really not true. But, they're skillfully putting it together to make it seem that way. So, how effective will they actually be? I'm not sure. Now, Trump campaign has spent more than Biden. But last week, pro-Trump groups struck back with $10 million, so $1 million more, in announced ads across Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. They hadn't run any in Florida, I guess, to paint Biden. I love how the paper here paints this. That attempt to paint Mr. Biden as a longtime champion of China's entry into the global economy, while casting China as the chief thief now and source of coronavirus. Mr. Trump also rallied against China during his 2016 campaign. Like I say, I love how they say that the Trump organization is attempting to paint Mr. Biden as a longtime champion of China. It is, he is a longtime champion of China. And also people's views of China are very negative right now. And I can tell you that Biden is going to have to answer for his chumminess with China. Remember, he essentially mocked President Trump for basically saying China was a threat. Like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania could also be uphill battles for Mr. Trump. One person close to the White House, certainly anonymous, right, expressed concern about Michigan, particularly if Mr. Biden picks Ms. Whitmerman. I told you this is going to be an issue. Democrats argued that Mr. Biden was well positioned to appeal to disaffected Republicans and moderate voters who supported the president in 2016. Well, let me start with the Republicans. I tell you, and maybe it's different in your state, but I have not seen any real disaffected Republicans. And I'm not talking about those never-Trumpers like the Mitt Romneys of the world. Utah, for instance, y'all should recall Romney now. But I have no doubt that Republicans are pretty much 100% behind Donald Trump. The Republican voters right now are not only in the high 90s for Trump, but they are enthusiastic, ready to vote for Donald Trump. And I'll tell you what, you need to be. You need to, as I've posted on Facebook, man, if we have to crawl through glass to vote for the president, by God, we better do it. And moderate voters, they're out there. There aren't any moderate Democrats. I'm not talking about voters. If you think Joe Biden is a moderate Democrat, then you need to guess again and go back and rewatch some of those debates. There were no moderate Democrats on that stage. Not a one. The few that might have been didn't even get above 1%. Joe Biden is a hardcore leftist. Now, if you're for that, hallelujah, go with him. But if you're concerned about us moving to the left and more socialist by the day, then Joe Biden is definitely no moderate. Let me check my time here. We got a few minutes left. But here's the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just get to it right here. Let me read this last paragraph and we'll move on. But David Urban, a Trump advisor who led his Pennsylvania effort in 2016, said Mr. Trump's chances in the state were strong, arguing that Mr. Biden's policy positions on energy and guns could still prove detrimental in the state. Guns, first of all, think about that. Guns now are a big issue, right? I don't think you're going to find too many people right now, based on gun sales and what I'm seeing, that are anti-gun right now. Matter of fact, people can't get enough of them. I got hardcore progressive Bernie Sanders supporters calling me, asking me, hey, can you get me a gun? First of all, I'm not a gun dealer, never have been. But because I'm an good old boy, they think I got the inside track to guns. I mean, when I was living and working up in New York City in the mid-'80s, whenever I'd be coming home for like Labor Day or something, all the construction workers on the job I was doing electrical work up there, you going back home? And I'd say, yeah, bring me back a gun, man. Like, this in the 80s, and they literally thought you bought guns at the 7-Eleven. I said, it ain't quite as easy as that, but we'll see what we can do. But so Trump has been right on about the guns, about everything. President Trump has been spot on about borders matter again. Think about that. You know, and here's a little tidbit side note for you. It's one of the things you don't get anything outside the show. Get this. If you don't have a gun, the best thing you could do to protect your home is to put a Trump 2020 sign right out in front of it. Trump Pence 2020. Put them all over your yard. Because if you put that up, first of all, don't ever tell anybody if you have a gun or not. But if you put a Trump Pence sign up there and people are looking to home invade, that's going to be the last one they come into because they're thinking, that dude is packing, I'm sure. So I'm just giving you a little pointer. Even some of you liberals out there, you might consider putting a Trump sign out there just for home and self-protection. Passion for President Trump, his is a big deal. Just look at one example. Like we broadcast on Citizens for Trump. Good morning, howdy, how are you? They got pushing 400,000 members on that page. Are there any Citizens for Biden pages? If there are, how many people are on it? I haven't seen one. If you have a link to one that has more than 10 people on it, I'd like to see it. But I just don't see the passion for it. Anti-Trump is the deal. This election is going to come down to how the American people feel about President Trump. And the debates, is there any reason to believe that Donald Trump is not just going to crush Biden? If these debates are actually them face to face, whether there's a crowd there or not, as long as they're not like video in separate rooms, because that could be cheated like deep fakes and stuff, Donald Trump is going to destroy Biden. I don't see any way around it. And once again, if you're for Joe Biden or you're considering Joe Biden, you should be forced to watch this video right here, at least in a 24-hour loop with your eyes taped open and maybe slapped around like sleep deprivation. Before you cast a vote for Biden, you ought to commit to watching this video 24 hours straight. Check it out.
And by the way, I got hairy legs that turn turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
You should be made to watch that 24/7. Well, we don't have much time left, so I'm going to skip this second story I was going to do and just skip down to the last one. And maybe I'll do this one about California tomorrow. But let's skip down to this. Barr warns states not to go too far, and stay-at-home orders threatens legal action. Attorney General Bill Barr, in a new interview on Tuesday, characterized some states' stay-at-home restrictions amid the pandemic as disturbingly close to house arrest, and said the Justice Department will consider legal action if governors start to take restrictions on movement and civil liberties too far. Well, I can tell you right now, the whole thing from the White House down to the governor's houses to the outhouses has gone too far, in my opinion, Mr. Barr, right now. So I don't know, some states more than others, there's no doubt about it. But I still want somebody to tell me on what authority anybody could shut us down the way they did. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't a right decision in some sense, but was it constitutional? I don't know. Barr told conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt, these are unprecedented burdens, these stay-at-home orders, on civil liberties right now. The idea that you have to stay in your house is disturbingly close to house arrest. Amen. I'm not saying it wasn't justified. I'm not saying in some places it might still be justified. Justified. So I decided I'd look up the definition of justified. And it's got two definitions that I think actually play here. Having done for or marked by a good or legitimate reason. So they probably had good or legitimate reasons. Is it constitutional? I don't know. This second definition of justified, declared or made righteous in the sight of God. Is it constitutional? I want to play this short video. We've played it before, but check this out. This is the governor of New Jersey about a week ago on Tucker Carlson talking about the Bill of Rights and how it played or didn't play into his decision making. Let's play it.
You made that decision, and as I noted before, 15 congregants at a synagogue in New Jersey were arrested and charged for being in a synagogue together. Now, the Bill of Rights, as you well know, protects Americans' right, enshrines their right to practice their religion as they see fit and to congregate together, to assemble peacefully. By what authority did you nullify the Bill of Rights in issuing this order? How do you have the power to do that?
That's above my pay grade, Tucker. So I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when we did this. We went to all. First of all, we looked at the data.
You can stop it there. I mean, it just, I don't know. It just infuriates me how he just goes, we weren't thinking about the Bill of Rights. No joke. You weren't thinking about the Bill of Rights. Who is? Who is thinking about the Bill of Rights? That's my question really going into all of this or coming out of all this. Who gave these people the authority to do what they did? Because trust me, now that government thinks they can just say, oh, it's in your best interest to shut you down, brother. they will use this power again, whether it be in the pandemic or something else. There'll be an excuse that say, well, look what they did there, and we're going to shut you down. We're going to shut you down. They're shutting down protests. We're going to talk about that more on tomorrow's show. We're going to focus on some of these, how our rights are being curtailed and what the threat of that is. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it, and share it with others. Ask yourself this question over the next couple of days and going on into the weekend after tomorrow's show. What are we willing to give up in freedom for security like Ben Franklin? That's what we got to keep asking ourselves every day, because that's the real question. I know the question right now in everybody is, when should we lift the stay-at-home order? I still believe that the real question is, how did we get a stay-at-home order to start with without anybody voting on it at all? As I say each and every day, lately at least, I'll pray for your family and you pray for mine. But I always say this, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.